Good morning. Thank you for coming. My name is Janez. I'm /RSM on all the internet-y thingies that you can imagine. You have these slides on this URL, so if you cannot see them because you're too far away from the screen, you can follow with your laptop. And also you can check them later. We're a very intimate crowd here. So who has heard about entity embed module in Drupal 8 already? Anyone using it? Okay. So I will it may be a little bit boring at the beginning for you guys because I will go through the basics. So I'm an active member of the Drupal community since 2009. I'm leading or one of the leads of Drupal D8 media initiative. I just left examiner.com 3 weeks ago. Examiner.com is a big media website. It was one of the first Drupal 7 websites. It used to be the biggest website on Drupal on the internet. It's fun. We've been working on a D8 project for the last 14 months, so it was a fun experience. And now I'm starting with MD Systems in May, and I've been actually collaborating with them for a few months now because they invested in media initiative a lot, and then we just kept going, basically. MD Systems, probably not many of you know that it's the biggest contributor to Drupal, organizational-wise. It has the most commits in the last 90 days. We have one of the top 5 Drupal 8 contributors I think. And they were, I think, the first company that launched a significant big media project on Drupal 8. And they created the Drupal 8 media distribution 1.5 years ago. So we can say that we're Drupal 8 experts, Drupal media experts. And we're based out of Zurich, Switzerland. I am strange kind of a guy. I've been working remotely for 8 years now, and I'm a strong advocate for remote work and for location independence. If you have not read that book, Remote Office Not Required, I strongly recommend it. And if you don't believe it's possible to make any company working remotely, you might change your mind if you read this. I like to go to nice places. I like to go to a bit less nice places. I have 3 girls, and I sometimes do silly things, or even more silly things. And often I think about problems that I cannot really resolve, and then they intrigue me. And I'm always here to help, especially if you are interested in modules that are part of the media initiative or anything else. Feel free to ping me, and if I have time, I will definitely try to help you. So contents of this session, basically, first we will check what was happening with embedding in Drupal 7, and then how things improved in Drupal 8 core, and what is missing from Drupal 8 core, and the reasons why entity embed module was created, what's the architecture of the module, how do we configure it, how we integrate it with another module from the media initiative, which is called Entity Browser, and a little bit of a roadmap that we have. And I'm also preparing a demo. We'll see how that goes. So in Drupal 7, we basically had a lot of WYSIWYG editors. We had this module, which wanted to support just any WYSIWYG editor that possibly exists on the internet, which sounds like a good idea, but it turns out it's probably not. And then each module that wanted to embed something into one of those WYSIWYG editors implemented everything from scratch. So we had at least 5 implementations where somebody was embedding something into the WYSIWYG. Most of the time, those were entities in one or another form. And they were not collaborating, they were not reusing any code, which was honestly hard to do anyway. So there was no perfect implementation. And a lot of resources was spent because we were re-implementing and reinventing the wheel all the time. And like, if you don't focus, then result is probably not the best. And now we come to Drupal 8. Can you see this? So this is Drupal 8's image embedding functionality. Drupal 8 core allows you to embed an image. You have a button on WYSIWYG editor. It opens a modal. You can upload a file. You can define alignment. And then you can also decide that you want to have a caption, which will stay with this image every time when you move it around in your content area of the WYSIWYG, which is very nice. Because it's way better than D7. It adds you ability to align, to add captions. It has a fairly nice UX. It also tracks usage of the files. For example, if in WordPress, maybe that's changed, but last time when I checked, which is a while ago, if you embedded an image into a WordPress WYSIWYG and then deleted it from the system, like WordPress didn't know that this image was embedded in that WYSIWYG. In Drupal, it's different because Drupal, every time when you use your file somewhere, it adds an entry into a database table, and then if you want to delete that file, it will throw you an exception and say, oh, hey, this file is used, so you should probably not delete it, and then you can force it if you want it, but you probably don't, because then you end up with broken images and all that. And the most important thing of this implementation probably is that it leads the way for D8 in general. Like entity embed, conceptually, like on the low level part, uses the same principles as this solution does. So there are also like things that we miss here. We can only embed self-hosted images, which means images that you upload on the server. There's no way to embed third-party images from Flickr and use their embed code, something like that, or even embed YouTube videos or SlideShare embeds, or like there are numbers of examples. And there's also no way to embed non-media. And there is not so much control over how this image gets displayed. So have you ever seen something like this? This is from Guardian. It's a pretty standard thing that they use in their articles. You have an article, and then you have a related article embedded in line with the content, and if you click on read more, it will take you to that article. And in Drupal terminology, this is basically a node being embedded into a node. And you cannot do this with core. And then, this is from New York Times. Very similar concept. Instead of a related article, we have a video embedded in line with the main article flow. And like you can also hear, we have author and publishing date, which is essentially a field from that media file node. So in Drupal's terminology, this is a media entity or file entity embedded into a node, and you display few fields from that media entity when displaying it in line. So again, something that you cannot do with what we have in core. And here we come to entity embed module. It lives on Drupal.org. It has a pretty logic name. It was officially born at NiceCamp 2 years ago when people from the media world ecosystem in Drupal met really for the first time in person and decided that we will stop arguing in the online threads and instead of that go into a room and lock ourselves there until we have an agreement. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was plan for entity embed module. And then we also got a Google Summer of Code project. With that Summer of Code project, development of the module really kicked off. As I said, it's built on top of the core approach. It uses the same principles. It allows you to embed anything, like any entity in Drupal. And later we It was initially started as a module to embed entities, and then we figured out that you might even want to embed things that are not Drupal entities, so we extracted like very basic functionality from entity embed module to embed module, which provides APIs that allows you to make other things embeddable. And there is another example which I will mention later. For example, now you can embed the YouTube video, which can be a media entity. You can still use entity embed to embed self-hosted files through using file entity or just file in core. You can, of course, embed nodes and then more strange things like taxonomy, which could be rendered as a list of articles or something like that. Related product, if you have an e-commerce site and like you want to expose some product that is currently on sale or something like that, you could totally do that. You could even embed like comments if you want to display discussion threads from some other places of the site. It's really no entities, at least content entities, that you couldn't use with that. Architecture basically lives on 3 levels. First level is the WYSIWYG integration, which essentially nails down to a button in the WYSIWYG editor, which opens a modal, which lets you to select or find entity that you want to embed, and then you have another step where you configure how it should be displayed. And then there's storage. Storage part, how this embedded entity gets stored in that text area in a way that makes sense, so you can actually find it later or track it, like we're tracking usage of files when you embed images, and then configuration of the display. So if there are any questions, you can totally stop me. There's no need to wait until the end.
You track also usage of nodes, for example?
Sorry?
You track the usage of nodes?
No, because there is...
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Okay, yeah, so the question was if we are tracking usage of nodes. We're not, because currently you only have concept of tracking the usage of files. And it's also, in my opinion, it's one of the problems that would make sense to make it generalized to all entities. Because right now, there's also a problem if you have a node and you tag it with the taxonomy term, and you delete that taxonomy term, you can do that. And then you still have a reference from that node. So it would totally make sense to track usages and all the references.
Dependencies at the end.
Yeah, kind of. So yeah, the WYSIWYG integration basically nails down to a button, which you can see there. We will see how to configure that. The WYSIWYG integration part goes through the embed module, which I mentioned earlier. It's more like lower API kind of thing. Unless you want to implement embedding of something of your own, you probably will not need it, except for the fact that it's a dependency for entity embed and you will have to download it, or Drush will do it for you. Then storage. For storage, we're using a standardized HTML tag, which becomes part of your text area. It's called Drupal-entity. It really could be anything. And it uses a series of data attributes to tell you which entity you want to embed, which is the UUID. And since we're using UUID, even if you use like this content staging strategies or anything like that, it should still work because UUID stays the same. The node ID won't necessarily stay the same if you deploy your content from staging to a production site, but UUID will stay the same, which means that things will work. Then we, of course, have to tell which entity type is that, and then we can align things left to right or in the center, and we can have caption. And these 2 lines below is configuration of the display, or at least default configuration of the display, because you can override that if you want. So what is really important here, when you embed an entity, entity is not rendered and saved in the rendered form as part of your longer text. That approach is so wrong, because if you render it when you create the content, and then you have a redesign later, what are you going to loop through all your content items and update rendered versions of embedded entities? And if you have a website with millions of nodes, it can even take weeks in some cases. But with this, we just store this meta information, and then when you display the actual content, we catch this, we use this information to render the entity, and replace the Drupal entity tag with the actual rendered version of what needs to be there. And previewing in CK Editor works the same way. CK Editor detects this tag, issues an AJAX request, and gets rendered version of the entity back, which is then displayed in WYSIWYG. So you never save rendered version of what is being embedded, which is very important, I think, because that makes things structured and logical, and you can do all sorts of stuff. You can even decide that you don't want to display your embedded entities, and you just have a filter on the display side that just deletes all the Drupal entity tags. Or you could potentially implement a filter that converts these to ESI tags, and then you can use Varnish to asynchronously load this and have different caching strategies for embedded content compared to the main content. It's very powerful. And the main tool for the display part are text filters. You know the configuration page where you configure filter text and full HTML and plain text? This is it. There, for each text format, you have a series of text filters that you can apply on that text format. And the most important one is display embedded entities, which is the filter that will recognize the Drupal entity tag and convert it into a rendered version of your entity. There are 2 other filters that come with core and are important because we rely on them for alignment and for captions. So if you configure captions or alignment, and if you don't have these filters enabled, it won't work. So you have to enable those, and then those filters take care about converting caption information into a nicely looking markup.
If it's possible to embed different kind of entities, maybe it doesn't make sense to have these properties to align images. I mean, if, for example, we are embedding a node,
Yes.
and not a media, like an image or whatever.
So this is a little bit confusing. So sorry, the question was if it makes sense to use alignment on things that are not images.
Yes.
Examples that I showed from Guardian and from New York Times, it's basically aligning the embedded node. In that case, it was left side, but it could be right side. So sometimes it makes sense. And why prevent it if you don't have to? And we can later show that even aligning embedded nodes works. It goes to the left or to the right. And then it's up to you how you style it to really fine-tune how it looks.
This filter applies to image tags, right?
And this is the documentation strangeness for core. These filters will take any HTML element that has data minus align or data minus caption attribute on it and work with it. So when you look at the code, it's actually not limited to an image. But the description...
If you take the most...
So maybe that's why I was confused.
Yes, that's confusing. But that's core, so we have to fix this as a core patch. So yeah, this is something that you have to be aware. It's strange, but yeah, it works. Even if you have even if you would manually write your own HTML and you add data align attribute to some kind of HTML element, it will still, and what this first filter essentially does, it replaces the data align attribute with a class. So
And it's just float left.
yeah.
What does it do?
Yeah, it's a class align minus left, align minus right, and then you have in core you have like default CSS that does that for you. And caption is similar. It just uses data caption attribute. It creates a figure element. It wraps your main element into a figure element and adds a caption to it. Yes, and one other very important thing is if you are using limit allowed HTML text to correct faulty HTML, which is basically security filter, which is enabled by default on filter HTML text format, and it's disabled on full HTML, for example. Like if you're using that filter, you have to configure it to allow this Drupal-entity tag, which I will show you. It's written in the README file in documentation of the module, of the entity embed module, but I will also show it to you later. So these are basically the three parts of the architecture. And you can use the first two parts as they are shipped with the module, and you can decide to implement your own text filter that does whatever you want, for example, ESI tags. So if you just don't like this part, you can still use everything else. When I mentioned the embed module, I said that the embed module provides APIs to allow embedding anything into WYSIWYG editor in D8. There is a module that uses that, which is called URL embed. And the idea, it's not so ready as entity embed is. I think that it can be used already, but it's still very rough around the edges. But it essentially uses embed module to integrate with CK editor, and then uses this embed library to recognize links and to render them. For example, you paste in a YouTube link and it will convert it into an embedded version of the YouTube video. And since this library knows how to work with a lot of different sources, you automatically get support for a lot of things. So these are not entities, but still using same concepts, same approach, and relying on the same low-level API.
For what's the difference between the normal link insert you have in the end?
So here you have these data attributes that tell how it's rendered.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you leave this out, then it's just a regular link.
Yeah, I think so. I wasn't actually playing much with it. I just tested it, how it works, and I saw that there were some commits coming in because I'm not actively working on this. But yeah, I think so. It should be like that. Okay, for display configuration, which is when you click the button in CK Editor and select the entity, then you have this next step where you define how this entity should look, which were also the last two lines in the Drupal entity tag, which I mentioned. For that, we're using entity reference field formatters. So if you imagine, like, you have a custom requirement by your client. You have some referenced entities from your nodes. You're using entity reference or taxonomy reference. It doesn't really matter. And they want it to look like in a completely special way, which is not supported by core. And you write a nice field formatter that does that for you. That field formatter will automatically work with entity embed, because all the rendering by default works through field formatters. And of course, one of the field formatters for entity reference is render entity with a view mode, basically. This is the default formatter that comes with core. It's called with render entity. So we can, this is the most obvious use case. You embed an entity and you say, I want it to be rendered as a teaser or as a full context content or any other custom view mode that you might create. And then you can also use other formatters. For example, with core, you will get entity ID formatter, which just displays the entity ID, and label, which displays the label of the entity and allows you to make it clickable, so then you can get to that entity. So this is what you get with core. But as I said, if you enable other contrib modules or if you write your own formatters, they will appear here and you will be able to use them exactly as you're using them with entity reference fields. Okay, now we have a short demo. Any questions about anything that we covered by now?
Maybe a stupid idea, but is it possible to, if we have a custom entity, to use it on the embedded entity, right?
So the question was, if we have a custom entity, is it possible to use it with the entity embed? Yes, any entity, you can use it with this. Assuming that Drupal knows how to render it. Because if you want to display it, you have to know how to render it. You either have to be able to render it as a view mode, or you have to have a formatter that knows how to deal with it. But yeah, any entity. There is an issue. I think that config entities right now don't work, but I don't see any reason why they shouldn't. And the main problem behind that is the rendering part. Because rendering of config entities is not standardized as rendering of.
Does this internally depend on the view builder entities? Because that would explain why config entities don't work, because we don't generally ship them with view builders.
Yeah, like at least the first part where you're using rendered entity formatter, yes, depends on that. But you might be able to have a entity reference field formatter which renders a view, and that should work, I think. So there's actually no reason why that shouldn't work, but I think it doesn't, at least not for every config entity.
We could probably do that.
Yeah, we should.
You were mentioning that in WYSIWYG, when you want to have a preview, it's happening through the AJAX request. How is it happening on the actual node page? Is it happening everything in the same HTTP request, or you also acquiring another AJAX request to render?
So the question was, I mentioned that WYSIWYG previews go through AJAX requests. How we handle the actual rendered version of this thing? Is it also using AJAX, or it's being built together with the other content? It's the second. Currently, it will just ship it as part of the main HTML. But yeah, like, and I was thinking about that already for obvious reasons, for performance and all that, and especially now, like big pipe and all these things that we have. Just the text filter part would need tweaking. You would need to change it to use lazy loader or lazy builder or something like that, or ESI, as I said. So yeah, it's not there, but it's definitely possible to do. Okay, let's see if this works. Yep. Can you see this? So I have a completely fresh install of Drupal here. First, I have to enable the module. And you will see that Drupal detected that it depends to the embed module. So it asks me if I am fine with enabling that too. Of course I am. And I already downloaded everything, so I don't have to do that. And now when it's enabled, first thing I should do is to go to the configuration pages and check the text editor embed buttons. This is a concept brought by the embed module, which allows you to create different buttons for different kind of embeds. And entity embed gives you ability to create buttons for embedding entities.
So could you create multiple buttons for specific entity types?
Yes, yes, yeah. So this node button comes with, by default with the entity embed module. And I could totally add another one for taxonomy. Here I check what kind of thing I want to embed, and because I have just entity embed enabled and not, for example, URL embed, I have just one option here. And then I can say that I want to embed taxonomy terms, and I can decide, I can limit bundles that can be embedded, and I can also limit the formatters that I allow. But I won't limit it now. And
Can you limit the view modes?
sorry?
The view modes, can you limit them?
I don't think so, but there is an issue for that.
Oh.
Yeah. Not for now. And now I can embed both of them. So this icon is default icon that we ship with, and it's very interesting. And you have, I've seen websites with 4 buttons for embedding, and each button had an E. So it was very, very user-friendly. And that's why I will replace this icon with a nice document. So now it makes more sense. Okay, now we have our embed buttons, and now we're ready to go to text formats configuration. And I will use basic HTML because it uses the HTML filter thing that filters out tags that are not allowed, so we will have to configure that too. Here we are. So first we need to configure that these buttons that we created actually appear on the CK editor toolbar, and we do that by simply drag and dropping it somewhere. So now we will have the node embedding enabled on this CK editor. And then we have to enable the display embedded entities filter, which will render your embedded entity. And aligning is already enabled by default, so that should work. And as I said, here we have list of allowed HTML tags, and we will need to add our tag to this list. And the easiest way to do that is to go to the README page. So all modules of the media initiative are both on Drupal.org and on GitHub. We accept both patches and pull requests, and all the code is synced. So that's why I'm on GitHub now, because it nicely renders the markdown README pages. And here in configuration part, you see if the text format uses the limit allowed HTML tags, blah, 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 ensure that this tag is allowed, which basically means that I need to copy this and paste it in here. Oops. Okay. So now this is a bit too small to be very visible, but you can see I have Drupal. Can you see this? We have Drupal entity tag, and we are specifically allowing just the attributes that we want. We decided not to whitelist everything because we thought that it's a better approach, it's more secure and all that. So okay, now we save that, and now we are ready to create our content. First I will create a basic page for embedded node. This is the content and I save it. And now I can create another piece of content which will, this is above, this is below, and now I press on the button. I get this modal where in the first step I have to select the entity that I want to embed. By default, you have the autocomplete here, but I will show you a little bit later that you can replace this with something much more friendly. And I find the node that I want to embed. I say that I want to render it as a teaser, and I embed it, and it appears here. And this preview is actually what I mentioned gets rendered through the Ajax request. And if you go into the source, you see that we have Drupal entity tag in here. And now, if we save and publish this, we see the host node. This is the text above the embedded node. This is text below the embedded node. And this is the embedded thingy that we have. And since it was rendered as a real entity, you have quick links here, which means that you can navigate directly to the edit page for the embedded node, or you can even do quick edit. And now I'm using quick edit to edit embedded node like as part of the main content. And now if I update this, and if I visit this node as a standalone page, it was updated. So even quick editing works as part of that.
Is this embedded as an iframe now in the?
No. It's let's see if this will be visible.
Because when I looked at some time, everything appeared as an iframe. Or
I don't think that the entity embed ever used iframes.
okay.
So it's an article tag. We render it and we just inject the HTML. Yeah, this is the basic functionality. And now, as I said, that autocomplete is not the nicest thing. Any questions about that? About the demo? No? So autocomplete works fine, but it's not the nicest thing in the world, obviously. And here is where Entity Browser module, which is another module from the Media Initiative, comes into the game. I could do another session just about the Entity Browser, but essentially what it is, it allows you to configure browsers which allow you to create or select entities that you want to use somewhere else. For example, you want to reference them from an entity reference field, you want to embed them with entity embed, you want to, these are two most obvious use cases, but there are also other things. Like on a custom project, we used it to create relation entities between entities and things like that. It also lives on Drupal.org. It's still a little bit rough around the edges, but if you know how to configure it, it works very nice. It's powerful, but it's very complex. Like in order to configure it, you have to understand 5 different types of plugins that work together to deliver the end user experience, and you really have to spend some time with it to understand it. We have some documentation. It's not perfect. We are improving it, but we try to at least have something. And we thought that it's better to invest the time into good examples, which you can use together with the documentation to learn about it. And the best example that we currently have, it's file entity browser module. It's also on Drupal.org. It's file_browser, which creates a view and uses Dropzone.js uploader to give you a nice experience where you can either upload multiple files in one go with Dropzone.js, or you can select existing files from a view. And view is like nicely themed, so it is also kind of useful on mobile and all that. So the best way to try Entity Browser is to check this module, and then when you will understand, you can do everything that you want. You can implement plugins for Entity Browser and do custom things, and as I said, it's very powerful. So File Entity Browser will create an Entity Browser config entity, which is configured to have the Dropzone.js uploader, which is the image on the bottom left, and you have another tab on the top, which is a view where you can select images or files, and then if you shrink that to a mobile size, it also kind of looks nice. There are issues, but like this is an example that it can be achieved. Okay, let me show you that. Any questions about the?
One question about the actual embedding part still. So I checked all the cacheability stuff is done very nicely. Have you tested it with things like BitPipe and
I didn't.
refresh list?
So the question was, cacheability looks nice in the entity embed. Bart checked it already, so and he asked if we tested it with BitPipe, and no, at least I didn't.
I was wondering because the whole idea of BitPipe is that you basically ship a very bare minimal page to the browser, and then using JavaScript, send in bits and pieces that are more expensive to render like asynchronously. I can imagine that the embedded entities are very expensive, so they could benefit from this, but I can also see how it's complex and breaks everything.
Yeah. So to repeat that, idea of the BitPipe is to render the bare minimum of the page initially, and then deliver expensive parts asynchronously, and that improves performance. No, we didn't try it yet. One thing that I find a little bit complex there is filters don't pass rendered arrays further. They render everything there and then just pass on the HTML. So that might be the tricky part of it. We'll have to check it. Yeah. Okay. We don't have much time left here, so I will do it quickly. Okay. So file, we will enable file browser, and we will also enable file entity, but you don't need to. I just need it for the sake of the demo. So you only need file browser. Okay, and file browser will, nice. It didn't happen yesterday when I tested, just to be clear about it. So it enabled Entity Browser module. So let's see if maybe it will still work. Let's check the buttons. Yeah, so the file browser will create a button that allows you to embed files. And when you enable Entity Browser, you get another piece of configuration here which allows you to decide which entity browser you want to use. For now, we have two, and we will stick to default. It should have an image, so maybe the image part was what went wrong. I will do that manually. And now if we go to the editors, and use this button, and all the other stuff should be okay. So now if I add a content, and if I decide to embed the image, I get, instead of the autocomplete, I get entity browser. Entity browser is this part with 2 tabs and this upload and all that. So first tab is uploading files, second tab is selecting files from a view. I don't have any files uploaded yet, so I'll have to do this. That's up here should do. So I uploaded a file, I select it, I want to display it as an image. And let's align it to right. So now it's embedded. Let's see, it's too big to be aligned, but we can check. So the image now has this class called align right, which aligns this to the right. And that's it. And now when I already have an image in my system, I can go to the listing page. I can select this image. And I can reuse it.
Is it possible to organize the files in folders with file browser or not?
No, with this view that file browser ships with, there is no support for that. And you would probably want to implement this with taxonomies on files and then using like taxonomy structure to move them. Any questions about that? So the roadmap module is very, very ready. A lot of people are already using it in production. There are 2 beta blockers left. One is more complex, and the one that is more complex is right now we have this like hard-coded support for entity browsers, and we want to make that pluggable so you won't be limited to autocomplete or the entity browser. If you make it pluggable, then you can create your own plugin that handles selection of the entities in a way you want. So this is the biggest piece that is missing, and obviously it's more like of a feature addition. So if you start using that, it definitely won't break your existing content. It might break your configuration, but there should be update path for that. So I really encourage you to use it because it's very ready. And we also, like my opinion is, if we don't achieve this plugin thingy in a month, like sometime after New Orleans, we should just release a beta and then do that as part of the feature release if it's possible, or if not, we should do it in 2.x. Because I don't think it's smart to wait too long with the release. And if you want to get involved, there is a project on Drupal.org. There is also a GitHub group that Drupal Media uses, and it's also there. As I said, you can open pull requests, or you can upload patches. We sync all the code, so all the code is latest on both sides. The only thing that you have to be aware of if you are using pull requests, please also open an issue at Drupal.org and link to the pull request, because we want to still use the issue queues as the primary communication tool. We're just trying to allow people to use pull requests for code reviews and all that if it works better. And we generally hang out in Drupal-Media on IRC, or also Drupal-contribute. Everybody is there. And that's more or less it for me. If you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer. Please.
Yeah, so I'm thinking about how, which part would be necessary if I want to have a real user-friendly plugin to generate a gallery. It's So there would be some kind, so I have a button, I click on it, there should be a model popping up, I pull in some pictures, and then it's rendered as a nice responsive whatever.
Yeah, so
what
for
products would I need for this, or is there what maybe you could put on tell which parts?
So the question is how to have a nice experience to embed a gallery. I think that there are a few parts here. The way I see galleries or slideshows or however you name them is that they are entities for their own. So how I usually implement this, and I already did it with media entity on a Drupal 8 project, is we had a media entity bundle called slideshow and media entity bundle called an image. And then you can use images like as standalone entities. It obviously works. And what slideshow bundle is, it essentially has an entity reference field and then you reference all the images. And if a slideshow is a standalone entity, then you just embed a slideshow. So this is the storage part. And I think this is the way how you do it right. And if you do it that way, you can either like create a slideshow on some other page, which is not the best solution that you want, but you could create a so-called entity browser widget, which would basically give you a form which lists images, and then you can drag and drop them, and when you submit that, it creates the slideshow entity behind the scenes, and then it embeds it.
Is there some control already?
For slideshows, no, but one example that you could use, so the question was if there is an example. For slideshow, no. There is a media entity slideshow module which creates this plugin, like the media type for slideshows. So we have this for the storage part, you can use that. To have this nice experience, there is no widget for entity browser like that yet, but you could check the dropzone.js widget, which is what I showed earlier, which actually works in a similar way. If you're using it with the media entity, when you upload files, it will upload files and then create media entities on submit behind the scenes. So you have this like you have a plugin example which you can use. Submit part is almost the same. The tricky part is making UI nice, which is more front-endy thing than back-end thing. So yeah, there is not yet, but with this tool set and a little bit of imagination and creativity, you can do a lot. Yes?
Embed buttons are a config entity, I guess.
So the question, sorry, yeah, go ahead.
So how is the image stored in config?
So yeah, the question was if embed buttons are config entities. The answer is yes, they are config entities. And the other question was how are the images stored in config entity? And the answer is I don't really know, but let's check. I think it's a path, but embed button. So no, it's UUID. So apparently it saves it as a file into a file manage table and then references it with a UUID.
So that's pretty true. It's more from one side to the other.
But this is the only way how it should work if you go from staging to deployment, because then you have UUID. You still cannot export the image, but if you would have deploy module, you can use that. And with UUID, at least that would work. Any other questions? Okay, thank you everyone. I really appreciate that you came this early.